Hello everyone, welcome to the session on Programming Paradigms, course code CS403. In the previous lecture, we were discussing about names, scopes and binding. In this lecture, we will be talking about object lifetime, storage management, stack allocation, heap allocation, issues related to dynamic memory allocation and garbage collection. I am Dr. Renu Mary Daniel, Assistant Professor, Department of CSE, ASET. Once again, welcome to the session. Now we will start discussing about the concept of object lifetime using a simple Java code snippet. So in any object-oriented programming language, the concept of class is very important. A class essentially creates a new data type. Once defined, this new type can be used to define objects of that type. Thus, a class is a template for an object and an object is an instance of a class. Here in this example Java code snippet, we have a simple class called box. It has just 3 instance variables: width, height and depth. Now in order to create an object of this class box, we need to follow a two-step process. First, you must declare a variable of class type. So that is shown in the rectangular box beneath. We are declaring a variable myBox of type box. However, this variable is simply a reference and it does not define the actual object. Next, you must acquire an actual copy of the object using the new operator, which allocates memory dynamically. That is shown as the second step. myBox equal to new box, which causes a copy of the object to be assigned to the variable myBox. Thus, as discussed in the previous slide, the statement box myBox declares myBox as a reference to an object of type box. After this line executes, myBox contains the value null, which indicates that it does not yet point to an actual object. Any attempt to use myBox at this point will cause a compilation time error. Now when we execute the next statement, myBox equal to new box, it allocates an actual object and assigns a reference to it to myBox. After the second line executes, you can use myBox as if it were a box object. But in reality, myBox simply holds the memory address of the actual box object. We have just seen how new operator dynamically allocates memory for an object. Now when we consider the code int I equal to 10, int j equal to I, what happens is that the value in the variable I gets assigned to j. But even then, both of them points to 2 different memory locations. Let's see if this is the case while assigning object reference variables. Consider the code fragment box b1 equal to new box, box b2 equal to b1. Now we might think that now b2 is getting a new copy of the box object. The object reference b2 is getting a new copy of the box object referred to by the object reference b1. However, this is not the case. When this fragment executes, b1 and b2 will both refer to the same object as shown in this figure. The assignment of b1 and b2 did not allocate any memory or copy any part of the original object. It simply makes b2 also refer to the same object as b1. Thus, any change made to the object through b2 will also affect the object to which b1 is referring to. Now consider what will happen if we try to unhook the object reference b1 by setting it as null. So as you can imagine by now, b1 will get assigned null, it will be unhooked. However, b2 will still be pointing to the same box object. Now we'll sum up everything that we learned about object lifetime using an example C++ program. Here we have 2 classes, class A and class B. Class A has a constructor and a destructor. Constructor simply prints constructor A, destructor prints destructor A. Similarly for class B. Now the function of a constructor is that whenever we create an object of that particular class, all the instance variables can be initialized within the constructor itself. But here in this case, it's simply printing a statement. And why do we need a destructor? Unlike in Java we know that we can perform automatic garbage collection. However, in C++, the programmer has to manually deallocate the memory allocated to an object using the new operator. So we know that new operator will dynamically allocate memory to an object. Such a memory is allocated at runtime and it has to be freed. So this can be done using the delete operator. So once the delete operator is called to free the memory, the destructor will be called, and in this case we'll get the print statement destructor A or B. So let's go to the main function. Within the main function, initially we have the instantiation of class A. So A star small a equal to new A. What happens is the object of class capital A will be created, and immediately the constructor will be called, and we get the first statement of the output, constructor A. It is shown on the right hand side of the slide. Now after that particular statement, A star A equal to new A, there is a block. There is a block, inner block in the main function, and in the inner block we have another statement, B star A equal to new B. Now we are creating an object reference for class B, also using the same object name, the object reference name small a. This is possible, and in this case the scope of the outer variable A will be hidden. And here in this case, in the inner scope, A will refer only to the object reference, A will refer only to class B, object of class B. And therefore, immediately the constructor of class B will be called, and we'll get the second output statement, constructor B. After that, we are deleting that object reference by calling delete A, and immediately the destructor of B will be called, and we get the third output statement, destructor B. And once we are out of the inner scope, again the object reference A points back to the class capital A. Now if you call delete A, the destructor of class A will be called, and the final output statement, destructor A, will be printed. Thus, as we have seen, assigning an object to an object reference variable is also called binding. Object lifetime is the time between creation and destruction of an object. The key events in object lifetime can be summed up as object creation, creation of bindings, references to variables, subroutines, types are made using the bindings. That is, you can create object references, and using these object references we can directly access the class variables as well as methods. Then deactivation and reactivation of temporarily unusable bindings, because as we have seen in the previous slide, sometimes the scope of an object reference will be hidden within an inner block. Then destruction of bindings and destruction of objects. Now we'll start with a very important concept of storage management. Object lifetime generally corresponds to one of the three principal storage allocation mechanisms. The first one is static. Static objects are given an absolute address that is retained throughout the program's execution. Examples are global and static variables in C, subroutine code, class method code. Next one is stack. Stack objects are allocated and deallocated in last in first out order, usually in conjunction with subroutine calls and returns. Example, automatic variables in C, actual arguments of a subroutine, local variables of a subroutine. The third one is heap. Heap objects may be allocated and deallocated at arbitrary times. Examples are pointer variables or dynamic memory allocation in C, C++ or Java class instances. We will see examples of each one in detail so that you will become clear with the concept. So what you see in this slide is a typical program layout in memory. Towards the bottommost area, what we see is the code segment. Program code is at the bottom of the memory region. Code segment, also known as text segment, contains executable instructions or compiled binary code. That is, we can say that it contains machine code instructions for a CPU. It is typically read-only and has a fixed size. So on embedded systems, it can usually be placed in read-only memory or ROM. The code section is protected from runtime modification. Above the code section, we have the static region, where the static or global variables will be stored. We know that the values of static or global variables will be retained throughout the execution of the program. Above the static region, we have the stack region where all the information pertaining to function calls as well as local variables will be stored. And stack grows upwards. Next, we have the heap section. Now, all the dynamic memory allocation will happen from the heap section. That is, whenever we use pointer variables in C or whenever we instantiate objects, instantiate classes, create object references in Java or C++, we know that memory will be dynamically allocated, and that happens from the heap section. And the heap grows downwards. Another important concept is that in heap, memory can be allocated in a non-contiguous fashion. It need not be continuous. This is a summarization of whatever we have discussed in the previous slides. That is the typical program and data layout in memory. So towards the bottommost part, we have the code section where the compiled binary code will be stored. Now above the code section, whatever we have is the data section, which include the static section where the static and global objects are stored. Next we have the stack segment, which is also part of the data section, and the stack segment stores all the data information pertaining to function calls and local variables. And finally we have the final part of the segment on top, which is the heap segment, which grows downwards, and the heap segment is associated with dynamic memory allocation. Now we'll start discussing about stack based allocation. The allocation happens on contiguous block of memory, unlike in heap based allocation. We call this stack memory allocation because the allocation happens in function called stack. The size of memory to be allocated will be known to compiler, and whenever a function is called, its variables get memory allocated on the stack. And whenever the function call is over, the memory for the variables will be deallocated. All this happens using some predefined routines in the compiler. The programmer does not have to worry about memory allocation and deallocation of stack variables. Now, each instance of a subroutine or function at runtime has a frame on the runtime stack, also called as activation record. Towards the right hand side of the slide, you can see a typical activation record layout. The frame layouts vary between languages and implementation. So a typical frame layout has a frame pointer which points to the frame of the currently active subroutine at runtime. It is not shown over here. A frame pointer will be pointing towards the currently active subroutine, and then we have something called the stack pointer which points to the free space on the stack. Then talking about a single activation record, it will have temporaries. Temporaries are intermediate values produced in complex calculations. Then it has local variables, bookkeeping information. This may include subroutine's return address, a reference to the stack frame of the caller, additional saved registers, debugging information, etc. Finally, it also has arguments and return values. Now here we will see an example of stack based allocation. In the second light blue colored box, you can see an example C program, and the corresponding stack frames are shown on the left hand side. So example C program, there we have a main function. Within the main function, we are initially calling the function A, and when function A is called, within the body of A we are calling function B, and within function B finally we will be calling function A again. So main calls function A calls B, B calls A. So which implies that again A will call B, B will call A, and it will go on calling each other again and again. So we'll just see what happens when main calls A. So initially we know that the function to be called is the main function, and towards the left hand side you can see all the activation records, and at the bottommost part you can see the main program. So initially the main function will be called, and the activation record of the main function will be pushed into the stack frame. Next, function A will be called and function A becomes active, and on top of the main program subroutine A's stack frame will be pushed. And we know that main function is not yet over and A is also not yet over. So whenever a function returns some value, its stack frame will be popped out of the stack. So currently none of them has finished execution, so it will go on pushing the activation records on top of the caller. So now we have subroutine A, and from this we know that subroutine A is going to call B. So next subroutine to be activated will be function B. So the subroutine B's activation record is going to be pushed inside the stack. Next we have B calling A. So again A will get active and the stack frame of A will get pushed into the stack. Now at this point of time, the currently active subroutine is subroutine A, and the frame pointer will point to the currently active subroutine. And you can see the stack pointer towards the top of the slide. The stack pointer points to the current free space inside the stack. Here in this slide we have an example for a single activation record of a Pascal procedure. So procedure P, which takes two arguments, an integer argument and another argument B, which is a pointer to B's value. And then there are three temporary local variables, foo, bar and p. So these three are the local variables of this Pascal procedure. So let's see how the activation record of this procedure is created. Towards the bottom of the activation record, we have the information about the arguments of the procedure. So we have two arguments, argument A and B. We have the offset information. For argument A, offset is 0 and the size is 2 words. For argument B, offset is 2 and size is again 2 words. Next we have, on top of that, we have the information about the return address. So in computer programming, a return statement causes execution to leave the current subroutine and resume at the point in the code immediately after the instruction which called the subroutine. This is called as the return address. So that information and the corresponding offset values will be stored in the return address part. Next we'll have some bookkeeping information, which are information regarding temporary registers or debugging information. And on top of that we have the information about the local variables. So just as in the case of the arguments, here again we have the local variable names, corresponding offset values and size. So on top of that, if we have any temporary values to be stored, it will be stored. Here in this case, we don't have any temporary values. We are not doing any calculations. At least it's not shown in this case. So it is left empty. So this is a typical activation frame of a procedure. So in order to give you a real-time illustration of how these activation records are being pushed onto the stack, I've provided an example C program here. It's a very simple program. We have a global variable A which is initialized as 20. Then we have two functions, sum and square, apart from the main function. Function sum returns an integer value and it takes an integer argument x. So sum just returns x square plus A, and in turn it calls another function square which returns an integer value and it takes an integer argument as input. So obviously square will return the value z square. From the main function, inside the main function we have two local variables, ans, answer and x. X is initialized with the value 4 and answer will store the return value of sum and function sum, and the argument x will be passed with. So finally sum will return the value 4 square plus 20, which will be printed as the answer. So here in this code, here in this program, we have a global variable A, and we know that all global and static variables will be stored in the static region of the code section. So that is shown here. The global variable A will be stored separately in the static region. Next we'll start execution from the main function, right? So inside the stack, initially the activation record, the main function will be pushed. So there we need information like the arguments of main function. It doesn't have any arguments. Next, the return address of the main function will be stored. Next, we'll have the local variables. So here we have two local variables, x and answer. So all these information will be stored in the activation record associated with the main function. From the main function, we are then calling the function sum, and so the function sum will now become active, and its activation record will be pushed on top of the main function. So function sum takes the argument x as input, so that is included in the activation record, doesn't have any local variables, and also the return address of sum will also be stored in the activation record of function sum. So I have not shown all the bookkeeping information and everything here. It's just for the ease of understanding. Only the main things are stored in this, shown in these activation records. Next, function sum, we know that it will call the function square before it returns. So now the function square will become active, and its activation record will be pushed on top of the activation record of the caller sum. Now the callee function, that is the function square, its return address will be stored. It takes argument z, so that also will be stored. It doesn't have any local variables. So at this point of time, function square is the currently active subroutine, and the frame pointer will point to the stack frame or activation record of the function square. And we have the free space, some free space in the stack, and the stack pointer will point to the current free space in the stack. Now suppose the function square finishes its execution and returns the value, computes the value z square and executes the return statement. Now we are at this point, and the stack frame associated with square will be popped out of the stack once its return statement is executed. And we'll go back to the function sum and resume execution at this point. So the function sum will compute x square plus a, which is in turn 4 square plus 20, and it will also execute its return statement. Therefore, sum's stack frame or activation record will also be popped out of the stack, and the execution will resume at this point in the main. That is, the value 4 square plus 20, that is 36, will be assigned to the local variable answer in main, and currently we will have only the stack frame of the main function in the stack. Now the function sum returns the value 4 square plus 20, which is equal to 36, and this value will get assigned to the local variable ans in main. Next statement that will be executed is printf answer equal to %d answer. Now when this statement is executed, actually we are making a function call to the function printf. So the activation record of function printf will be pushed on top of the activation record of main. And when this statement has finished execution, the activation record of printf will be popped out of the stack. And next, the main function will finish its execution, and it will call the statement returns 0. So now the activation record of main function will also be popped out of the stack, and the program will finish its execution. Now I'm sure you might have all encountered this error while executing programs. Stack overflow. We know that the stack pointer points to the free space in the stack. A stack overflow occurs if the call stack pointer exceeds the stack bound. That is, there is no more free space in the stack. A call stack may consist of a limited amount of address space, often determined at the start of the program. The size of the call stack depends on many factors, including the programming language, machine architecture, multi-threading, and amount of available memory. When a program attempts to use more space than is available on the call stack, the stack is said to overflow, typically resulting in a program crash. This is illustrated in the code snippet provided here. It shows infinite recursion. The function foo repeatedly calls itself, causing stack overflow. Let's see what happens with the stack. Initially, the activation record of foo will be pushed onto the stack. Foo calls foo again, so the activation record will be pushed again. Again, foo calls itself, and so on until all the free space inside the stack is consumed and stack overflow results. Summarizing whatever we have learned so far about stack allocation, the stack grows and shrinks as functions are called and returned. There is no need to manage the memory yourself. Variables are allocated and freed automatically. Every time a function exits, all of the variables pushed onto the stack by that function are freed. Once a stack variable is freed, that region of memory becomes available for other stack variables. The stack has size limits, as we have seen in the previous slide. Stack variables only exist while the function that created them is running. Now we'll start discussing about heap memory allocation. The heap is a region of your computer's memory that is not managed automatically for you and is not as tightly managed by the CPU. It is a more free-floating region of memory and is larger, and we have already seen that heap memory allocation need not be contiguous. To allocate memory on the heap, you must use malloc or calloc as far as the language C is concerned, or you can use the new operator in case of C++ or Java. Once you have dynamically allocated memory on the heap, you are responsible for using free function in C to deallocate that memory. So in the case of C++, you have to use the delete operator, while in Java, the automatic garbage collector will take care of deallocating the memory for you. So if you fail to deallocate the memory in C and C++, your program will have what is known as memory leak. That is, memory on the heap will still be set aside although you are not using that memory anymore. Unlike the stack, the heap does not have size restrictions on variable size, apart from the obvious physical limitations of your computer. Heap memory is slightly slower to be read from and written to because one has to use pointers to access memory on the heap. We'll talk about pointers shortly. Unlike the stack, variables created on the heap are accessible by any function anywhere in your program, and it is essentially global in scope. Now here in the slide we'll see an illustration of heap memory allocation. So in C we know that to dynamically allocate memory from the heap we have to use the functions malloc, calloc or realloc, and in order to deallocate the memory we have to use the functions free. Correspondingly in C++ we have to use the new operator for allocation and delete operator for deallocation. So here in this program we have an integer pointer p. Using the function malloc we are allocating 4 bytes of memory. Size of int usually will be 4 bytes. So 4 bytes of memory will be allocated. Malloc usually returns a pointer. It will return a pointer to the memory location. And this pointer will be of type void. Therefore, we are typecasting it to integer in star. And now in the next line, we are assigning the value 10 to the address pointed to by pointer p. Next, in the next statement, we are printing the address in p as well as the value in p. In the next statement, if you notice, we are again allocating another 4 bytes of memory to the same pointer p without using the free function. So we are not calling the free function, but we are once again allocating another 4 bytes of memory to same pointer p. Now p will point to the new memory location, and the value 300 will be stored in the new memory location. And the initially assigned memory location in the heap is not yet freed. It's still marked as it's being used currently. So let's see the output of this program. You can see that the address in P in the first case is 8347664, and the second case we are not using the same address, it is 8347696. Now we'll see the working of this program using stack and heap. So in this particular C program we don't have any static or global variables, therefore we need not talk about the static region of the code segment. So we'll first start with the stack section. So when the main function of the program is called, its activation record will be pushed onto the stack. So initially the stack frame or activation record of main function will be pushed onto the stack. It contains the return address. There are no arguments to the main function, so we need not include that. There is only a single local variable which is a pointer, integer pointer p, so that is also included in the activation record. When we execute the statement p equal to int star malloc size of int, we know that 4 bytes of memory will get allocated to pointer p. So that is illustrated here. From the heap, the malloc will dynamically allocate 4 bytes of memory and P will point to the starting address 8347664. And when we execute the statement star of P equal to 10, the value 10 will be assigned in this memory location. Now again when we execute the next malloc statement P equal to int star malloc size of int, this pointer will no longer point to this memory location, and the malloc will again find out a new 4 bytes of memory location from the heap. It will dynamically allocate another 4 bytes starting at 8347696 according to the output of the program. So another 4 bytes, and pointer will now point to the starting address of this particular memory location, and the value 300 will be assigned to this particular memory location. Notice that the initial 4 bytes is still marked as being consumed. Now we will discuss about an issue associated with not freeing dynamically allocated memory. It is known as memory leak. A memory leak occurs when you allocate memory dynamically and never give it back. When you allocate memory dynamically, that memory is allocated from the heap, a part of the system memory used by your program. On the contrary, variables and functions draw memory from the stack. So towards the right hand side of the slide, you can see a program code. There, from the main function, we are calling a function called oil leak, and within the function oil leak, we are declaring a double pointer, and the pointer, each time you call the function operator new, 8 bytes of memory will get, because 8 bytes will be allocated because double data type will use 8 bytes in C++. So 8 bytes of memory will get allocated, and the pointer will now point to the starting address of this 8 bytes. So this represents a binding because a pointer is now getting bound to a specific memory location. Now next time when you call oil leak, the function oil leak, again this particular statement will get executed, and pointer will now point to another 8 bytes of memory location. Notice that the previous binding is destroyed and there is no way to release the previously allocated 8 bytes of memory. So each time you keep on calling this program, 8 bytes of memory will be utilized and will never be freed, which causes memory leak. To resolve this issue, we have to add the following line in oil leak. That is, we have to add the line delete pointer in the function oil leak. So after writing double star pointer equal to new double, you have to include the statement delete pointer, so that before the binding gets destroyed, that memory location in the heap will be freed. This is also called as garbage collection. So here is yet another example for memory leak from C. In this program, we have an integer pointer P. When we execute the statement P equal to int star malloc size of int, 4 bytes of memory will get allocated and P will point to the starting address of the memory. And we are just printing the starting address using the printf statement. After that, we are assigning the value 10 to the memory location pointed to by P. Next, we have yet another malloc function being called. So P is equal to int star malloc size of int, which means that the initial binding of P to the 4 bytes of memory location is being destroyed, and P is getting bound to a new 4 bytes of memory location. And P will now point to the starting address of the new 4 bytes of memory location. Now again we are trying to print the address pointed to by P, and we are assigning the value 20 to the new memory location. So when you look at the output of this program, in the first case, from the first binding, the starting address pointed to by P is 215.61360, and in the second binding, the starting address pointed to by P is 215.61392. And when we bind P again in second time, the address 215.61360 from the initial binding, it's still held up and it is not free to be reused. Those 4 bytes are still marked as being used. To mitigate this, before reassigning P to a new address using malloc, we must use the function free of P. Free of P instructs the memory management logic that the memory previously occupied by the block which P points to can be reused. Now we'll discuss about another issue associated with dynamic memory allocation, which is dangling pointer. So we'll discuss this using an example C program. Dangling pointers arise during object destruction when an object that has an incoming reference is deleted or deallocated without modifying the value of the pointer so that the pointer still points to the memory location of the deallocated memory. Let's understand this with this example C program. So within the main function we have an integer pointer p which is initially set as null, and in the next statement we are calling the function malloc and we are allocating size of int star 5, that is 4 into 5, 20 bytes of memory to p, and p will now point at the starting address of this 20 bytes of memory. Next we are doing a condition checking if p is equal to null. So why we need to do this condition checking is that we know that malloc will dynamically allocate memory from the heap. What if the heap does not contain this 20 bytes of memory? So in that case, p will still have the value null. So we are just checking if that much memory is available and it is allocated, and p points to a valid address. Next line, so if everything happens well, it will go to the next line, free of p. Now what happens? The allocated 20 bytes of memory will be freed, it will be deallocated, and it will be available in the heap to be used by some other program. So here we are deallocating the allocated memory. However, the binding of p to that memory location is still active. So if you execute a statement star of p equal to 2, the program will have unpredictable behavior because the memory may now contain a completely different data. So we must also remove the binding by inserting the code p is equal to null. So if you set p equal to null, we are essentially destroying the binding to, so we won't have any issue regarding dangling pointers. Now here is an example for dangling reference in C++. So in C++ there's something called reference. When a variable is declared as reference, it becomes an alternative name for an existing variable. A variable can be declared as a reference by putting ampersand in the declaration. So here in the main function you can see that we are creating a reference r to the return value of the function getX. So getX is now going to return an integer reference. So that is a reference to the local variable x within getX. So we know that x will become out of scope when it returns the value. So x is active only within the function getX since it's a local variable declared within getX. So what happens in dangling reference is that it is illegal to access a reference to an object that has gone out of scope or been otherwise destroyed. So such a reference is said to be dangling since it no longer refers to a valid object. In this example, the local variable x goes out of scope when the function getX returns. Therefore, R is a dangling reference since the value of x is not accessible in main. So we have seen few issues regarding binding and dynamic memory allocation. Binding are temporarily invisible when code is executed where the binding is out of scope. So when we talk about memory leak, binding to the object may have been destroyed, rendering access impossible. Remember in C, C++ pointers, when we call malloc the first time, some p will start pointing to a particular memory location. Without calling free or delete operator, if we again allocate another set of memory to the same pointer p, the previous binding has been destroyed, but the memory location initially assigned still remains, still will be marked as used. So the binding to the object may have been destroyed, rendering access impossible. However, the object itself might not be destroyed. In the case of dangling reference, object is destroyed before the binding is destroyed. Garbage collection resolves these allocation or deallocation problems. So we know that during dynamic memory allocation, memory will be allocated from the heap in a non-contiguous manner. So as in the previous example program, if we wanted 20 bytes of memory, it will be searching for that 20 bytes of memory within the heap. So to find the free spaces within the heap, each of these algorithms will maintain a linked list of free heap blocks, which is called as free list. The first fit algorithm, what it does is it selects the first block that is large enough on the list of free heap blocks. The best fit algorithm searches the entire list for the smallest free block that is large enough to hold the object. If an object is smaller than the block, the extra space can be added to the list of free blocks. When a block is freed, adjacent free blocks are merged. Now we have two more algorithms. The one is buddy system and the one is Fibonacci heap. We'll see each one of them with examples. So now we'll start with buddy system. We will start with an example. Suppose a binary buddy heap has 64 KB free block. Okay, the entire heap is free and it is added to the free block, and it receives a request from an application for an object of size 8 KB. So it now needs 8 KB free block. It checks its free list for an 8 KB free block and it finds the entire 64 KB. So what it does is it will split the 64 KB into 32 KB, 32 KB, two blocks of size 32 KB. From one of the free blocks of 32 KB, it will again split it into 16 KB free block, another 16 KB free block. And from one of the 16 KB free block, it will again get one 8 KB, another 8 KB free blocks. And one of this 8 KB free block will be assigned to the program which requested it. So one of these 8 KB will be now allocated, and the rest of the 8 KB free block, 16 KB free block and 32 KB free block will be available in the free list. Suppose another application requests for a block of 10 KB. The allocator would round this request to 16 KB and then return the 16 KB block from its free list, wasting 6 KB in the process. So this is how the buddy system works. It maintains heap pools of standard size blocks of size 2 power k. If no free block is available for the object of size between 2 power k minus plus 1 and 2 power k, then it finds block of size 2 power k plus 1, split it in half, adding the halves to the pool of free 2 power k blocks, etc. Now let's discuss about the Fibonacci heap algorithm, which is a variation of the buddy system. The Fibonacci heap maintains heap pools of standard size blocks according to Fibonacci numbers. A Fibonacci buddy system might use block sizes 16, 32, 48, 80, etc. bytes such that each size is the sum of the two preceding sizes. This is more complex but leads to slower internal fragmentation. So we have seen that garbage collection helps us to get rid of many issues such as memory leak as well as dangling pointers. A garbage collection algorithm is one that automatically deallocates heap storage when it is no longer needed. There are two aspects of garbage collection: automatically determining which portion of heap allocated storage will not be used in the future, making this unneeded storage available for storage, later allocation. Disadvantages of garbage collection is extra burden for language implementer. Extra machine resources will be consumed when the garbage collector is running. Manual garbage collection, as in C++, is more efficient since a programmer knows when the storage is no longer needed. Now we'll see a few other important concepts related to heap allocation. Heap allocation may be implicit or explicit. Example of implicit heap allocation is Java class instance. So we have already seen that whenever we create objects in Java, we use the new operator and memory is being dynamically allocated from the heap. Similarly, scripting languages and functional languages make extensive use of heap for storing objects. Some procedural languages allow array declarations with runtime dependent array size. For instance, in C or C++, we can have the user specify the size of the array at runtime, and based on the user requirement, our array can be resized using dynamic memory allocation. Similarly, we can also have resizable character strings. In explicit heap allocations, statements or functions are used for allocation and deallocation. In C, we will be using malloc or calloc, and we will be specifying exactly how many blocks should be assigned for a particular object. Heap allocation is performed by searching heap for available free space. Here is an example heap in which the first block is allocated to object A. The second block is free. We have free 4 words there. Then object B is occupying some space. Object C is occupying some space. We have free 12 words block there. After that we have object D occupying some space, and then again we have free 10 words. Suppose we receive a request for allocation of an object which will take 10 words. Then since we already have a block of free 10 words, it will be readily allocated to that block. Suppose this free 10 words block was not there, and all that we had was the free 4 words and free 12 words blocks. Then that free 12 words block will be used for storing object T. So it will be allocated to that particular process. Notice that this will lead to internal heap fragmentation. So since the allocated object is smaller than the free block, the extra space of 2 words will be wasted. In external heap fragmentation, smaller free blocks cannot always be reused, resulting in wasted space.